Imagine sitting in front of a grand piano, your hands trembling above the keys, while 500 pairs of eyes burn into your back. The silence in the room is deafening. Your heart pounds so hard you can hear it in your ears. And standing just 10 feet away, arms crossed with a smirk that could cut glass, is one of the most famous singers in the country, waiting, expecting, almost hoping for you to fail. This was the reality for Naomi Brooks on a Tuesday night that would change her life forever. But how did she get here? How did a young woman who was supposed to be working backstage end up at the center of what would become one of the most talked about moments in music history? To understand that we need to go back to 30 minutes before this moment. Back to when Naomi Brooks was just trying to do her job and stay invisible. The Beverly Grand Hotel in Los Angeles was buzzing with energy that evening. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors, and the city's elite mingled in designer gowns and tailored suits. This wasn't just any event. This was the annual Harmony for Hope Charity Gala, a fundraiser for the Children's Music Education Foundation, an organization dedicated to bringing music programs to underprivileged schools across America. The guest list read like a who's who of the entertainment industry. Actors, producers, musicians, and philanthropists had all gathered for an evening of performances, speeches, and generous donations. The main event, a headline performance by Julian Cross, the 32-year-old pop sensation, whose face graced billboards from New York to Los Angeles, whose songs topped every chart, and whose ego, many whispered, was even bigger than his fame. But our story doesn't begin with Julian Cross. It begins with Naomi Brooks. Naomi was 23 years old, with deep brown eyes that held more wisdom than her years suggested, and hands that moved with a grace she'd spent years developing in secret. She wasn't at the gala as a guest. She wasn't there to perform. She was there as a stage assistant, part of the crew hired to make sure everything ran smoothly, adjusting microphones, testing sound levels, making sure the performers had everything they needed. It was honest work, and Naomi was grateful for it. Growing up in South Los Angeles, she'd learned early that opportunities didn't knock, you had to hunt them down. Her mother cleaned houses 6 days a week. Her father had worked construction until the accident that left him unable to work until the medical bills piled up, until the system that was supposed to help them failed, until he passed away when Naomi was just 16. Money was always tight. But music was free, if you knew where to look. Naomi had discovered piano, the way most kids her generation discovered everything through YouTube. She was 12 when she first heard Clair de Lune by Debussy playing through the scratchy speakers of the family's old computer. Something in those notes wedged inside her chest and wouldn't let go. She watched that video 17 times in one sitting. Then she found more. Beethoven, Chopin, Rachmaninoff, but also jazz pianists like Oscar Peterson and Bill Evans, gospel musicians from small church choirs, blues players whose fingers moved across keys like they were telling stories of pain and redemption. Naomi didn't have a piano. Her family couldn't afford one. But the community center 3 blocks from her apartment had an old upright in the corner of the rec room, and the director let her practice during off hours. She taught herself, hour after hour, year after year. Her fingers learned the geography of those ivory keys. Her ear learned to distinguish a C sharp from a D flat. Her heart learned to pour everything she couldn't say into the music. Her father had been her biggest supporter. Even when he was sick, even when the pain medication made him foggy, he would sit in the corner of the rec room and listen to her practice. "You've got something special, baby girl," he'd tell her. Don't let anyone tell you different. Don't let anyone make you feel like you don't belong. He died 3 weeks before her 17th birthday. They couldn't afford the treatment that might have saved him. Naomi kept playing. It was the only thing that made sense. Now, 6 years later, she was backstage at one of the most prestigious venues in Los Angeles. She wasn't performing, but she was close to the music. And sometimes close was enough. The stage was set for Julian Cross's performance. The grand piano sat center stage, polished until it gleamed like black glass under the lights. Naomi had been assigned to do a final sound check, making sure the piano's microphone was positioned correctly. She approached it carefully, almost reverently. It was a Steinway Model D, the kind of instrument most pianists only dreamed of playing. She adjusted the microphone, then, unable to resist, she sat down on the bench. The ballroom was empty. The guests were still in the reception area. She had maybe 3 minutes. Her fingers found the keys. She closed her eyes and began to play just a few bars, just a moment to feel what it was like to touch an instrument this perfect. She played the opening of Clair de Lune, the piece that had started everything for her all those years ago. The notes floated through the empty ballroom, soft and haunting. She didn't hear the door open. She didn't hear the footsteps approaching. She was lost in the music, in the memory of her father sitting in that corner of the rec room, smiling despite the pain. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The voice cut through the music like a knife. Naomi's hands froze above the keys. Her eyes snapped open. Julian Cross stood 15 feet away, his face a mixture of shock and anger. He was taller than he looked on television, dressed in a designer suit that probably cost more than Naomi made in 3 months. His dark hair was perfectly styled. His jaw was clenched. Naomi stood up so fast she almost knocked over the bench. "I'm sorry, I was testing the sound equipment. You didn't mean to sit at my piano and pretend you're some kind of pianist." Julian's voice dripped with disdain. He walked closer, his eyes scanning her crew uniform. "You're stage crew. You're here to move equipment, not play it." "I know. I'm sorry. I was just making sure the microphone placement by playing Debussy." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Let me guess. You took some lessons as a kid, and now you think you're qualified to touch a $200,000 instrument." Naomi felt heat rising in her cheeks. "I was just testing the acoustics. I'm done now. I'll leave." "No." Julian's voice stopped her. There was something calculating in his eyes now, something cruel. "Actually, I think you should stay. I think everyone should see this. See what the difference between someone who actually has talent and someone who just pretends." He smiled, and it wasn't kind. "This is a charity event for music education, right? I think everyone here should understand why real training matters, why some people belong on stage and others belong backstage." Naomi's stomach dropped. "I don't understand what you will." Julian pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey, tell the event coordinator I want to make an addition to the program. Yeah, before my performance. Trust me, everyone's going to love this." He hung up and looked at Naomi with that same cold smile. "Congratulations. You're going to perform tonight after all." Naomi felt like the floor had dropped out from beneath her. "What? No. I can't. I'm not a performer. I'm crew." "You were good enough to play my piano without permission," Julian said, circling her like a predator, sizing up prey. "Surely you're good enough to play for an audience. Unless..." He paused dramatically. "Unless you were just messing around. Just pretending. Just someone who doesn't actually know what they're doing. That's not fair." The words came out before Naomi could stop them. "Fair?" Julian's eyebrows rose. "You want to talk about fair? You know what's not fair. People who cut corners. People who think watching some YouTube videos makes them musicians. People who don't put in the real work but want the same recognition. He stepped closer, his voice dropping to something more dangerous. This industry is full of people like that. People who think they deserve to be here just because they want it badly enough. Naomi's hands were shaking, but it wasn't just fear anymore. It was anger. She'd heard variations of this speech her entire life, from the music teacher at school who told her private lessons were for serious students, from the counselor who suggested she focus on more realistic career paths, from every person who looked at where she came from and decided they knew what she was capable of. "I wasn't trying to take anything from you," Naomi said quietly. "I was doing my job, and now you're going to do something extra." Julian pulled out his phone again and showed her the screen. He'd already posted to his social media 10 million followers watching in real time. The post read, "About to give someone an unexpected opportunity at tonight's gala." Sometimes we all need to be reminded why we should stay in our lane. Harmony. For hope, real talent. The post already had thousands of likes, hundreds of comments. Naomi felt sick. "The event coordinator is making the announcement now," Julian said, pocketing his phone. "You're going up on that stage in 20 minutes. I'd practice if I were you. Oh wait, you can't really practice when you never learned properly in the first place, can you?" He walked away, leaving Naomi standing alone on the empty stage. Her mind was racing. She could leave. She could walk out right now, quit this job, go home. She'd find another gig, another way to pay rent. It would be embarrassing, but it would be over. But something stopped her. It was a memory. Her father 3 days before he died. He was in so much pain, the medications barely touched it anymore, but he'd asked her to play for him one more time. She'd snuck the old keyboard from the community center into his hospital room. She'd played Claire de Lune, trying not to cry. When she finished, he'd opened his eyes. "Baby girl," he'd said, his voice barely a whisper. "You've got magic in those hands. I won't be here to see where it takes you, but I need you to promise me something. Anything, Daddy. Don't let them make you small. The world is going to try. People are going to look at you and think they know your story before you even open your mouth. They're going to tell you what you can't do where you don't belong. And baby, most of the time, they're going to be wrong." He'd reached for her hand. "When that happens, you play. You play like your life depends on it. You show them what they're too blind to see on their own." She'd promised. Through tears, she'd promised. And now standing on this stage with Julian Cross's cruel words still echoing in her ears, Naomi realized she had a choice. She could run from this moment, or she could walk into it. She thought about every kid in South Los Angeles who loved music but couldn't afford lessons. Every person who'd been told they didn't have the right background, the right training, the right look. Every dreamer who was dismissed before they even got a chance. She thought about her father and the promise she'd made. Naomi walked to the piano and sat down. Her hands were still shaking, but this time it wasn't fear. It was determination. The ballroom had filled, while Naomi sat at the piano trying to steady her breathing. 500 guests in their evening finest now occupied the round tables, champagne glasses glinting in the soft light. The low murmur of conversation created a constant hum of sound deals being made, gossip being shared, donations being pledged. Naomi stood backstage now, watching through a gap in the curtain. Her supervisor, a kind woman named Patricia, had found her there. "Naomi, what's going on? I just heard you're performing." Patricia looked confused and concerned. "That's not on the schedule." "Did someone make a mistake?" "It's complicated." Naomi's voice sounded far away, even to herself. Before Patricia could respond, the lights dimmed. The conversations quieted. The event coordinator, a polished woman in a silver gown, walked to the center of the stage with a wireless microphone. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Before we get to our headline performance by the incredible Julian Cross, we have a special unscheduled treat for you tonight." She paused, building anticipation. One of our backstage crew members has been given a unique opportunity, a chance to perform on this magnificent stage. Please join me in welcoming Naomi Brooks to the piano. The applause was polite, but confused. People were looking at their programs, whispering to their table mates. Who was Naomi Brooks? Why was crew performing? Naomi's legs felt like they were made of water, but she forced herself to walk. Every step from backstage to the piano seemed to take an eternity. The spotlight found her, and suddenly she was visible to everyone, her crew uniform, her simple appearance so different from the glamorous performers they'd expected to see tonight. She could hear the whispers now, feel the questions. Julian Cross stood in the wings, visible enough that the audience could see him, his arms crossed, and that same cruel smile on his face. He wanted them to see this, wanted them to understand that he was the one orchestrating this moment. Naomi reached the piano and sat down. The bench was still warm from when she'd sat here 20 minutes ago. Was it only 20 minutes? It felt like a lifetime. The coordinator was still talking. Now I've been told that Naomi has a particular piece in mind for us tonight. And in the spirit of tonight's mission supporting music education for all young people, regardless of their background, I think we're in for something special. That's when Julian walked onto the stage. The audience erupted in applause. He waved, playing the gracious star. He took the microphone from the coordinator. Thank you," he said, his voice smooth and confident through the sound system. "I actually want to add something to tonight's moment. See, I believe in the mission of the Children's Music Education Foundation with all my heart. Music education isn't just about fun, it's about proper training. Real instruction, learning from masters who can teach you the right way to do things." He walked closer to the piano, to Naomi. "I caught Naomi here earlier, playing this very piano, and I thought what better way to demonstrate the importance of proper musical training than to give her this opportunity to show everyone here what's possible with real dedication versus—" He paused, letting the implication hang. "Well, versus enthusiasm without foundation." Some people in the audience shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward with interest. This wasn't what they'd expected, but it was certainly entertaining. "So here's what I'm thinking," Julian continued. "Naomi, I'd like you to play something for us, and then I'll play the same piece. The audience can hear the difference between someone who's been properly trained and someone who's still learning." Sound fair? It wasn't fair. It wasn't fair at all. Every person in this room could see what he was doing, but no one was stopping it. Naomi looked up at him. The spotlight made it hard to see his face clearly, but she could feel his confidence. His certainty that she would fail. His belief that he was about to prove something. "Actually," Naomi said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I have a different idea." Julian's smile faltered slightly. "Oh. You pick the piece," Naomi said. "You tell me what to play. Something you think is difficult. Something that requires—" She paused. "Real training." The audience murmured. This was getting interesting. Julian's smile returned wider now. "Oh, I like that. I like that a lot." He turned to the audience. "How about Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3? Just the first movement, of course. We don't want to be here all night." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Naomi's heart sank. Rachmaninoff's Third was legendary among pianists, one of the most technically demanding pieces ever written. Horowitz had called it impossible. Pianists spent years mastering it, and Julian wanted her to sight-read it here now in front of 500 people. He was giving her an impossible task, making sure her failure would be absolute and public. "There's just one problem," Naomi said. Only one Julian's voice dripped with mock surprise. "I don't know that piece." The admission felt like defeat. She could see triumph in his eyes. "Well, there you go," Julian said to the audience. "One of the most important pieces in the piano repertoire, and she doesn't know it. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Real musicians, properly trained musicians, know these works. They study them. But I'd like to play something else," Naomi interrupted. The ballroom went quiet. "I'd like to play something my father taught me before he died." Her voice was stronger now. He wasn't a professional musician. He worked construction. But he loved music more than anyone I've ever known. And he spent his last months teaching me a piece he'd composed himself. He never got to hear it played properly. He died before I was good enough. The energy in the room shifted. This wasn't the entertainment they'd expected. This was something raw. Something real. "I'm good enough now," Naomi continued. "So if it's okay with you, Mr. Cross, and with everyone here, I'd like to play my father's piece. And then you can judge whether I belong on this stage or not." Julian's face was harder to read now. He'd wanted simple humiliation. This was becoming complicated. But he was committed to his narrative, and 500 people were watching. 10 million more online. "By all means," he said, stepping back. "Play your father's piece. Let's see what home-taught talent looks like." Naomi turned to the piano. Her hands found the keys. She closed her eyes, and she began to play. The first notes were soft, gentle. Naomi started with something simple, a melody that sounded almost like a lullaby. It was the kind of opening that made you lean in, made you quiet your breathing to hear better. In the audience, people stopped whispering. The gentle notes demanded attention without asking for it. Julian stood in the wings, his arms still crossed, but his expression was changing. This wasn't what he'd expected. He'd expected nervousness mistakes, amateur playing that would prove his point. This was different. The melody Naomi played was beautiful, yes, but it was also deeply personal. You could hear it in every note. This wasn't just music. This was memory. This was love and loss translated into sound. She began with what sounded like a traditional piece, something classical and structured. Her fingers moved across the keys with the kind of precision that comes from thousands of hours of practice. Her posture was perfect. Her touch on the keys was controlled, deliberate. But then, about a minute in, something shifted. The classical structure began to bend. Jazz influences crept in unexpected chord progressions, syncopated rhythms. The melody started to breathe, to swing, to move in ways that felt both spontaneous and perfectly intentional. This was the piece her father had taught her. And it was unlike anything anyone in that ballroom had heard before. Her father had been a construction worker, yes. But what Naomi had never mentioned to Julian, what she'd never gotten the chance to explain, was that her father had been a musician in his youth. He'd played in jazz clubs in New Orleans before an injury to his hand ended that dream. He'd moved to Los Angeles for work, started a family, lived what people called a normal life. But he'd never stopped composing, never stopped hearing music in his head. And in those last months of his life, when the pain was too much and the medications made everything fuzzy, the one clear thing in his mind was this piece. He'd taught it to Naomi bit by bit, measure by measure. Sometimes he could only manage 5 minutes before the pain overtook him. Sometimes he'd wake up at 2 in the morning, clear-minded, and call her to come over so he could teach her more. It had taken him 3 months to teach her the complete piece. He died 2 weeks after she'd finally played it through from beginning to end. Now, on this stage, in front of all these people, Naomi was playing it again. And she was doing more than just playing the notes. She was channeling everything her father had poured into it, every moment of joy in his life, every moment of pain, every dream he'd had to set aside, every hope he'd placed in his daughter. The piece evolved as it progressed. The jazz influences gave way to gospel, big, rich chords that felt like Sunday morning in a small church. Then blues crept in, sad and slow, and full of the kind of truth that makes you ache. And through it all, there was the original melody, the lullaby weaving in and out like a thread connecting everything together. People in the audience were leaning forward now. Several had tears in their eyes, though they couldn't have explained exactly why. The music was reaching something in them, something beyond technique, beyond training, beyond theory. It was reaching their hearts. Julian's smirk had vanished completely. He was watching Naomi with an expression that was harder to read now. Was it surprise? Respect? Or something more complicated, the realization that he'd miscalculated badly? On stage, Naomi's eyes were closed. She wasn't performing anymore. She was remembering. She was talking to her father through this music, telling him things she'd never gotten to say, telling him she missed him, telling him she understood now what he'd been trying to teach her, not just the notes, but what music could mean, what it could do, how it could take everything you've experienced and turn it into something others could feel. The piece built slowly. No dramatic flourishes, no showing off. Just honest, beautiful progression from one section to the next. And then around the 4-minute mark, Naomi did something unexpected. She began to add her own embellishments, not changing her father's composition, but expanding it, taking the foundation he'd given her and building something new on top of it. This was her addition to his legacy, her voice joining his in a duet across time and death. Her right hand began to play increasingly complex runs up and down the piano. Her left hand maintained the chord progression, but with added depth, octaves, then tenths stretching the range of sound. The technical difficulty was becoming apparent now. These weren't simple melodies anymore. This was virtuoso playing, the kind that requires strength, speed, and precision that can only come from years of practice. But more than that, it was musical. Every run, every arpeggio, every flourish served the emotion of the piece. Nothing was there just to impress. Everything had purpose. In the audience, several professional musicians sat up straighter. They recognized what they were hearing. This wasn't amateur playing. This was someone who understood music at a deep level, who had internalized theory so completely that it had become instinct. The piece continued to evolve. Naomi brought in elements of contemporary music, unexpected dissonances that resolved beautifully modern chord voicings that shouldn't have fit, but somehow did. She was showing range now, showing knowledge, showing that she didn't just know one style or one approach. She knew music. All of it. The whole vast language of it. And she was fluent. Naomi had been playing for nearly 6 minutes now, and the piece was building towards something. The audience could feel it, that sense that a storm was gathering, that everything so far had been prelude to what was coming. But then something unexpected happened. Naomi opened her eyes. She didn't stop playing. Her hands continued, the music continued, but her eyes opened and she looked out at the audience. Not at Julian. not at any particular person, just at all of them. And in that moment, something in her decided. She'd been playing her father's piece. She'd been honoring his memory, his teaching, his love. That was important. That mattered. But this moment wasn't just about her father. It was about her. About every person who'd been told they weren't good enough, didn't have the right credentials, came from the wrong place. About every dream that had been dismissed as unrealistic. This moment was about proving that talent didn't come from privilege. That music didn't belong to people who could afford the best schools and the most expensive teachers. That sometimes the most profound artistry came from people who had to fight for every moment they got to practice. So, Naomi made a decision. She was going to show them everything. The piece entered a new section, one that wasn't part of what her father had taught her. This was improvisation now. This was Naomi taking the foundation and launching into something entirely her own. Her hands began to move faster. The tempo increased. The complexity doubled. She started with a section inspired by Chopin, flowing arpeggios that cascaded up and down the piano like water. Her fingers were a blur, but every note was crystal clear. The Steinway responded to her touch perfectly, its rich tone filling the ballroom. Then she shifted. The Chopin gave way to something more percussive, more modern. Her hands began to hammer out rhythms that felt almost like drums, like the piano was an entire orchestra condensed into one instrument. People in the audience gasped. This wasn't possible. How was she doing this? But Naomi wasn't done. She brought back the original melody, her father's lullaby. But now it was transformed. It soared over the top of everything else, played in octaves with the right hand, while the left hand continued its complex, rhythmic patterns. She was essentially playing two completely different pieces simultaneously, and somehow it worked. Somehow it was beautiful. This was technique at the highest level. This was the kind of playing that took not just skill, but physical conditioning, the kind of strength and endurance that came from years of training your hands, your arms, your entire body to execute at this level. Julian was no longer standing casually in the wings. He'd moved closer to the stage, watching with an expression that had moved from smug superiority to something like shock. He was good. He knew he was good. He'd spent years training, studying, performing. But what he was watching now was something beyond what he was capable of. This wasn't just different in degree. It was different in kind. Naomi's improvisation continued. She quoted other composers, now a phrase from Rachmaninoff, the same concerto Julian had mockingly suggested a motif from Gershwin, a hint of Debussy's Clair de Lune, the piece he'd caught her playing earlier. She was showing everyone that she did know this music. All of it. She'd studied it, learned it, internalized it, not in a formal classroom, but on her own, driven by pure love of the art. And she was using all of it now, synthesizing it, creating something new from everything she'd learned. The piece had been going for nearly 10 minutes now. In the audience, people had forgotten to drink their champagne, forgotten to check their phones. They were transfixed. Some of them were crying openly. The music was so honest, so raw, so technically brilliant and emotionally devastating all at once that it broke through the usual reserve of a high society crowd. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was witnessing something extraordinary. Naomi brought the improvisation to a peak, both hands playing in the highest register of the piano, the notes bright and ringing and triumphant. She held them there, sustained them, let them fill the space. And then, without warning, she brought everything down. The volume dropped, the complexity simplified. She returned to the original melody her father's lullaby played simply and quietly in the middle register of the piano. After all the fireworks, all the technical display, she was reminding everyone what this was really about. The love between a father and daughter. The transmission of art from one generation to the next. The simple human need to create something beautiful. The melody played out, getting softer and softer, until finally Naomi played the last note and lifted her hands from the keys. The silence that followed was absolute. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The last note hung in the air like a question waiting for an answer. Then the ballroom exploded. 500 people rose to their feet as one. The applause was deafening, not polite charity gala applause, but the kind of ovation that comes from genuine shock and awe. People were shouting, crying. Some were on their feet, clapping with their hands above their heads. Naomi sat at the piano, stunned. She'd been so lost in the music that she'd almost forgotten the audience was there. Now the wave of their reaction crashed over her, and she didn't know what to do with it. She stood up, uncertain, and the applause somehow grew louder. Julian Cross stood frozen in the wings. His face had gone through several emotions in the past minutes: surprise, then grudging respect, then something that looked like fear, because he understood something that the audience didn't yet realize. He'd set this up. He'd orchestrated this whole moment. He'd brought Naomi on stage to humiliate her, to prove a point about training and credentials, and who deserved to be in the spotlight. And she'd just made him look like a fool. The event coordinator rushed on stage, her professional composure barely intact. She was crying and didn't seem to care who saw. Naomi Brooks, everyone. Naomi Brooks. More applause, more shouting. People in the audience were already pulling out their phones, posting clips to social media. The moment was being captured from dozens of angles spread across the internet in real time. The coordinator turned to Naomi, speaking close to her ear to be heard over the applause. "That was, I don't even have words. Where did you learn to play like that?" Naomi's voice was shaky. "My father taught me. And YouTube, and a piano at the community center. And anywhere I could find." The coordinator's eyes widened. Then she did something unexpected. She took the microphone and held it out to Naomi. Tell everyone what you just told me." Naomi took the microphone with trembling hands. The applause quieted slightly as people realized she was about to speak. Her voice echoed through the sound system. She cleared her throat. "I'm not a professional musician. I never went to music school. I can't afford lessons. I taught myself to play by watching videos and practicing whenever I could find a piano to use." The silence now was different than before. Attentive. Waiting. "My father died when I was 17. He couldn't get the medical treatment he needed because we didn't have insurance. But before he died, he taught me that music doesn't belong to people who can afford it. It belongs to everyone. It belongs to anyone who loves it enough to chase it." Her voice grew stronger. "The piece I just played, the foundation of it, was his. He composed it in his head while he was dying. He taught it to me in pieces whenever he was strong enough. And tonight I got to play it for an audience for the first time." So, tears were running down her face now. "Thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me a chance to honor him." The applause came back, but this time it was mixed with a different sound. People were calling out to her. Encouragement. Support. Affirmation. And then from the back of the ballroom, someone shouted, "What about Julian Cross? I thought he was going to play too." The energy in the room shifted instantly. All eyes turned to the wings where Julian still stood. He looked trapped. His earlier confidence had evaporated. He'd set up this comparison, his playing versus hers, trained versus untrained. But now that comparison would destroy him. If he didn't play, he looked like a coward. If he did play, he'd be judged against what everyone had just witnessed. There was no good option. The coordinator looked to Julian, holding out the microphone. "Mr. Cross, would you still like to perform?" The audience waited. In that moment, 500 people were holding a celebrity accountable in a way that rarely happened. His arrogance, his cruelty, his assumption that he could humiliate someone for sport. It had all been exposed. Julian walked onto the stage. His smile was gone. He took the microphone. He paused. The audience could see him trying to find a way out, a way to spin this. But there wasn't one. "I clearly underestimated Miss Brooks. Her playing was exceptional. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't even close. But it was an admission, and everyone knew it." However, Julian continued, and Naomi's heart sank. He wasn't done. "I think this proves my original point. Real talent, true mastery doesn't need formal training. It finds a way. And when someone has that kind of natural gift, they shouldn't be backstage. They shouldn't be hidden. They should be recognized and supported." He was trying to reframe it, trying to make it seem like he'd been testing her, like this had all been part of some plan to discover and celebrate hidden talent. Some people in the audience nodded. They wanted to believe it. They wanted their celebrity to be a good guy, wanted this story to have a simple, happy ending. But others saw through it. And more importantly, the internet saw through it. Because what Julian didn't know yet was that his earlier social media post, the one mocking Naomi, talking about people staying in their lane, was being shared thousands of times alongside videos of her performance. The context made his cruelty obvious. The internet had already decided who the villain was in this story, so I'd like to invite Miss Brooks to stay on stage. Julian continued, his voice smooth again as he found his footing. "And I'll accompany her on vocals. Let's show everyone what happens when raw talent meets professional artistry." It was a power move. He was trying to reassert control to make himself central to her moment. Naomi stood there, the applause still ringing around her, and realized what was happening. He was trying to use her now, trying to associate himself with her success so that when people remembered this night, they'd remember both of them together. She looked out at the audience, saw the mix of faces, some believing Julian's reframe, some clearly angry on her behalf, most just confused about what was happening. She thought about what her father would say, about staying true to herself, about not letting people make her small. And she made another decision. "Actually," Naomi said, taking back the microphone, "I think I'd rather play one more piece on my own, if that's okay." The audience murmured. Julian's face tightened. "I'd like to play something," Naomi continued, "that shows what's possible when someone has access to the music they love, when they're not told they don't belong, when they're given the chance to learn and grow and develop their gifts." She walked back to the piano and sat down. Julian stood there on stage, unsure whether to leave or stay. He looked to the event coordinator, who just shrugged. This night had gone completely off script. Naomi's hands found the keys again, and she began to play something that would ensure no one in that ballroom would ever forget her name. What Naomi played next wasn't a piece anyone recognized. It wasn't from the classical canon. It wasn't a famous jazz standard. It wasn't something you could look up in a music library. It was entirely her own creation. She'd been composing it in her head for 3 years, adding to it, slowly refining it, but never having an opportunity to play it on an instrument good enough to do it justice. The community center piano could barely hold a tune. The keyboards she occasionally borrowed had limited range. But this Steinway, this could handle everything she'd imagined. The piece started simply enough, a single melodic line in the right hand floating over quiet, sustained chords in the left. It was beautiful. Yes, but it was also just a foundation. She was building something. After about 30 seconds, the left hand began to complicate. The chords became more dissonant, more jazz-influenced. The right hand melody stayed pure, creating a contrast: innocence over complexity, simplicity over chaos. Then both hands began to move together. The melody fractured into 2 voices, then 3, then 4. Naomi was playing counterpoint now, multiple melodic lines weaving in and out of each other, each one independent, but all of them working together. This was Bach-level complexity, but with modern harmonies. It shouldn't have been possible to keep all these voices clear, but her touch on the keys was so precise that every line remained distinct. In the audience, several professional musicians were shaking their heads in disbelief. This kind of polyphonic playing required not just technical skill, but intense musical intelligence. You had to be able to hear all the voices in your head simultaneously, understand how they related to each other, and then execute them flawlessly with your hands. The piece evolved. About 2 minutes in, Naomi introduced a rhythmic element. Her left hand began playing a pattern that felt almost Latin, a clave rhythm syncopated and driving. The right hand continued its melodic exploration over the top. This was fusion now. Classical polyphony meets Latin jazz. It was unexpected, but it worked perfectly. Then she shifted again. The Latin rhythm gave way to something more aggressive. Her left hand began hammering out thick, dissonant chords while her right hand played angular, modern melodies. This section felt almost violent, beautiful in its intensity, but challenging, demanding attention. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't easy listening. This was music that asked something of you. But Naomi wasn't trying to please everyone. She was expressing something true. This section was anger, the anger of being dismissed, of being underestimated, of watching her father die, because the system didn't value his life enough to save it. The angry section built and built, getting louder, more intense, until suddenly, silence. Naomi lifted her hands from the keys. Complete silence for 2 full beats. Then she brought them down again, playing something completely different. Soft, gentle, almost childlike in its simplicity. This was the emotional turn, from anger to acceptance, from chaos to peace. She played a melody that sounded like a hymn, something that could have been sung in one of the small churches in her neighborhood. Simple chord progressions, earnest melody, the kind of music that makes you think of Sunday mornings and community and belonging. But then she began to complicate it. The hymn stayed in the right hand, but the left hand started adding elements, running bass lines borrowed from gospel music, then stride piano techniques from the jazz tradition, then classical arpeggios. She was showing the lineage of American music, how everything connected, how the hymns sung in churches influenced gospel, which influenced jazz, which influenced everything else. How you couldn't separate these traditions, they were all part of the same story. And she was part of that story too. The piece continued to evolve. Around the 5-minute mark, Naomi did something that made several pianists in the audience audibly gasp. She began playing in octaves with both hands, the same melody in both hands, 8 notes apart, while simultaneously playing a completely different bass line with her left pinky and a different melodic flourish with her right pinky. This required her to essentially split her focus 4 ways. Most pianists couldn't do this at any speed. She was doing it at a tempo that made it look almost easy. It wasn't easy. It was the result of thousands of hours of practice, of training her hands to work independently while her mind controlled them all, of building the physical strength and flexibility to span these intervals comfortably. The melody in octaves was triumphant now, bold, confident. This was the sound of someone who'd fought through doubt and come out the other side certain of their gifts. Julie and Cross, still on stage, but now in the shadows, watched with an expression that had moved beyond shock to something like despair. He was good. He knew he was good. But what he was watching was mastery. The difference between them wasn't training versus no training. It was passion versus ambition. Art versus commerce. Someone who played because they needed to express something vital versus someone who played because it brought them fame. Naomi's piece entered its final section. She brought back elements from earlier, the original simple melody, the Latin rhythm fragments of the angry section, but now they were all integrated, all working together. This was synthesis. This was everything coming together into something greater than the sum of its parts. Her hands were moving faster now, playing passages that seemed impossible. Wide jumps across the keyboard executed with perfect accuracy. Runs that covered the entire range of the piano in seconds. Chords that required her hands to stretch well beyond an octave. And through it all, the music never lost its emotional core. Every technical flourish served the expression. Nothing was there just to show off. The piece built to what felt like a final climax, huge chords, both hands playing in the extremes of the piano's range, the sound filling the entire ballroom. And then, in an instant, it all came down to a single note in the middle of the keyboard. One note, held, sustained, then silence. The piece was over. This time the silence lasted longer. It wasn't that the audience didn't want to applaud, it was that they needed a moment to process what they'd just experienced. 7 minutes. Naomi had played for 7 minutes straight, original composition, technical mastery, emotional depth, without a single mistake, without a moment of hesitation, without breaking the musical spell she'd created. Then someone in the back stood up and began to clap. Just one person, slow, deliberate applause. Then another person stood, then another, then entire tables. Within seconds, all 500 people were on their feet again, but this ovation was different from the first one. This was reverence. This was recognition that they'd witnessed something rare, not just talent, but artistry at a level few people ever achieve. People were shouting her name now. Naomi, Naomi, Naomi. Some were crying openly, including several men in expensive suits who probably never cried in public. The music had broken through. Their professional armor had reached something deep inside them. Naomi stood from the piano, overwhelmed. She'd been in a trance while playing, completely absorbed in the music. Now facing the reality of what she'd done, of how people were reacting, she felt dizzy. The event coordinator rushed on stage again, tears streaming down her face. She hugged Naomi, completely unprofessional, completely spontaneous, completely genuine. Then she turned to the audience. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what to say. In 20 years of organizing events, I've never witnessed anything like what we just saw. More applause, more shouting. Naomi Brooks is 23 years old. She has never attended music school. She has never had a private teacher. She learned to play piano by watching YouTube videos and practicing on whatever instruments she could access. The coordinator's voice was shaking, and she just gave us one of the most extraordinary performances I have ever seen. The applause swelled again. I've just been informed, the coordinator continued, that the board of directors of the Children's Music Education Foundation would like to offer Naomi a full scholarship to the music school of her choice, including a living stipend for as long as she wishes to study. Naomi's hands flew to her mouth. What? You've shown us exactly why our mission matters, the coordinator said, turning to Naomi. You've shown us what's possible when talented young people have access to music, even if that access is imperfect. Imagine what you could do with the resources you deserve." The audience was going wild now. This was the story they wanted: the underdog winning talent being recognized, justice being served. But then a voice cut through the noise. "Wait." Julian Cross stepped forward back into the light. His microphone was still on. The ballroom quieted. What was he going to say now? Julian looked at Naomi, and his expression was complicated. Pride was gone. Arrogance was gone. What remained was something more human: embarrassment, perhaps. Recognition of his own behavior. Maybe even genuine respect. "I owe you an apology," he said. The audience seemed to hold its breath. "I set this up tonight to humiliate you, to prove a point about training and credentials that—" He paused. "That wasn't really about music at all. It was about my own insecurities, my need to feel superior, my fear that maybe the things I've spent so much money on, the expensive schools, the famous teachers, maybe they don't matter as much as I've told myself they do. This was not what anyone expected. Celebrities didn't admit things like this. Not publicly. Not in front of hundreds of people and millions online. What you just did," Julian continued, "is beyond what I'm capable of. Not because you have more training, you have less, but because you have something I've lost somewhere along the way. You have a genuine connection to music. You play because you need to, not because it's your job." He turned to face the audience. "I make a lot of money playing music, millions of dollars. But I don't know if I actually love it anymore. I think maybe I just love being famous, being important, being the center of attention." Someone in the audience started to applaud, but Julian held up his hand. "Don't. Don't applaud me for admitting I'm shallow. That's not growth. That's just finally saying out loud what everyone probably already knew." He looked back at Naomi. "You deserved better than what I tried to do to you tonight. And I'm sorry. Truly sorry." Naomi stood there, not sure how to respond. Part of her wanted to accept the apology gracefully. Part of her was still angry because saying sorry didn't erase what he'd tried to do, didn't erase the cruelty of his intention. "I appreciate your apology," she said finally, "but I didn't play tonight to prove anything to you. I played for my father, and for every kid who loves music but can't afford lessons, and for myself to remind myself that I do belong here even if someone like you thinks I don't." The audience erupted again. That was the response they wanted from her. Not gracious forgiveness, but honest recognition that an apology didn't fix everything. Julian nodded. "You're right. And for what it's worth, I meant what I said. You should be recognized. You should have resources." And he paused. "If you'll allow me, I'd like to help make that happen. Not to fix what I did tonight, I can't fix that, but because it's the right thing to do." Before Naomi could respond, someone else stood up in the audience. A woman in an elegant black dress, probably in her 60s, walked toward the stage. People parted for her, and Naomi could sense that this was someone important. The woman took the stairs to the stage and approached the microphone. "Hello, my name is Dr. Patricia Henderson. I'm the Dean of the Thornton School of Music at USC." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. USC's music school was one of the best in the country. "Miss Brooks," Dr. Henderson said, "I came to this event tonight, expecting to hear Mr. Cross perform and to make some connections for the university. What I got instead was the privilege of witnessing one of the most remarkable demonstrations of musical talent I've seen in my 40 years as an educator." She turned to address the whole ballroom. "The scholarship being offered by the Children's Music Education Foundation is generous and important. But I'd like to add to it. Miss Brooks, if you're interested, I'd like to offer you a place in our Artist Diploma program, a program we reserve for performing artists of exceptional ability. Full scholarship, plus a monthly stipend, plus access to any resources the university can provide. Naomi felt like she couldn't breathe. I don't even have an undergraduate degree. I never went to college. The Artist Diploma program doesn't require one, Dr. Henderson said. It's designed for people who already possess professional-level skills and want an environment to refine their artistry. You more than qualify. The applause came back, but Naomi barely heard it. Her mind was spinning. Hours ago, she'd been backstage just trying to do her job. Now she had scholarship offers, standing ovations, and one of the most prestigious music schools in the country inviting her to study there. It was too much. It was overwhelming. It was what her father had always believed would happen, even when she couldn't believe it herself. Tears streamed down her face. She nodded, unable to speak, accepting Dr. Henderson's offer. The ballroom exploded with joy. The celebration continued for several minutes. People came up to the stage to introduce themselves, to offer congratulations, to ask for her contact information. Business cards were pressed into her hands. Phones were held up for pictures. The energy was electric, joyful, overwhelming. But then gradually people began to notice something. On the large screens around the ballroom screens that had been showing a live feed of the stage, the display had changed. Now they were showing social media. Specifically, they were showing the explosion happening online. Someone in the venue's tech booth had made a decision to display what was happening in real time on the internet. And what was happening was extraordinary. Naomi's performance had been captured on dozens of phones. Those videos were being shared, retweeted, reposted at an exponential rate. In less than 20 minutes, Naomi Brooks was trending nationally. Within an hour, it would be trending worldwide. But that wasn't all the screens were showing. They were also showing Julian Cross's original post, the one he'd made before Naomi's performance, where he'd talked about people staying in their lane, about the difference between real talent and pretenders. The juxtaposition was devastating. His words next to videos of her performance, his arrogance next to her humility, his cruelty next to her grace. The internet was not being kind to Julian Cross. Celebrities were weighing in. Professional musicians were sharing the videos with commentary about Naomi's skill. Music educators were using it as an example of why access to music education matters. Social justice advocates were pointing out the racial and class dynamics of what Julian had tried to do. Some of the comments on screen were harsh. Julian Cross tried to humiliate a black woman on stage, and she destroyed him with talent. This is what privilege looks like, thinking you're better than someone without even hearing them play. Julian Cross's career should be over after this. Julian stood on the stage watching the screens, watching his reputation crumble in real time. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. This was the reckoning. This was consequences. In the old world, celebrities could do things like this and move on. Their publicists would spin it. Their fans would defend them. The moment would fade. But this was being captured and shared and dissected by millions of people. This would follow him forever. Someone in the audience shouted, "You got what you deserved, Julian." Others joined in. The mood in the room was shifting. The joy of Naomi's triumph was mixing with anger at what Julian had tried to do. People wanted accountability. The event coordinator, sensing things could get ugly, stepped to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, I think we've had enough drama for one evening. Let's remember why we're here: to support music education for children who need it." But someone else shouted, "Julian Cross should donate his performance fee to that cause. He doesn't deserve to get paid after what he tried to do." Applause greeted this suggestion. People were nodding. The idea spread through the room. All eyes turned to Julian. He stood there trapped again. If he refused, he'd look even worse. If he agreed, he'd be admitting guilt, accepting punishment. There was no good option. But maybe for the first time tonight, Julian did something genuinely right. "You're right," he said into the microphone. His voice was quiet, defeated. "I don't deserve to be paid for tonight. I'll donate my entire fee, it's $50,000, to the Children's Music Education Foundation. And," he paused, "I'll match the scholarship they're giving to Naomi. Another $50,000 for her education. It was a good gesture. It was the right thing to do. But everyone in the room could see it for what it was: damage control, not genuine generosity. Still, it was something." Naomi watched all this unfold with a strange sense of detachment. This night had become about so much more than music. It had become about justice, about class, about race, about who gets opportunities and who doesn't. It had become a symbol, and she wasn't sure she wanted to be a symbol. She just wanted to play piano. Dr. Henderson approached her quietly. "I imagine you're feeling overwhelmed." Naomi nodded, unable to form words. "Would you like to leave? I can have my car brought around. We can get you out of here, away from all this chaos." "But the event isn't over. Julian was supposed to perform." Dr. Henderson smiled gently. "I don't think anyone cares about that anymore. Tonight was your night. Everything else is just noise." Naomi looked out at the ballroom, at the screens showing her face alongside harsh comments about Julian, at the crowd still talking, still processing, still filming everything, at Julian standing alone on the stage, looking smaller than he had an hour ago. She thought about what her father would say, about grace, about humility, about taking the high road. She walked to the microphone one more time. "Excuse me," she said, and the room quieted. "I want to say something." All attention turned to her. "Tonight has been..." She struggled to find words. "It's been the most incredible night of my life. I've been given opportunities I never dreamed of. I've played music for an audience that really listened. I've been seen in a way I've never been seen before." She paused. "But I don't want this to become about tearing someone else down." Mr. Cross apologized. He's making amends. And while I'm still processing how I feel about what he tried to do, I don't think destroying his career serves anyone. Some people in the audience looked disappointed. They wanted retribution. They wanted justice to look like punishment. What serves people, Naomi continued, is focusing on the bigger issue. There are thousands of kids like me out there. Kids who love music, who have talent, who could be extraordinary if they just had access to instruments and instruction. That's what tonight should be about. Not about one person's mistake, but about systemic change. She looked directly at Julian. "You want to make this right. Don't just donate money tonight. Use your platform. Use your fame. Help create the access that I never had. Make sure the next Naomi Brooks doesn't have to teach herself from YouTube videos." Julian nodded, and this time his expression seemed genuine. Naomi turned back to the audience. "And to everyone here, everyone watching online, if tonight moved you, if my story means something to you, then do something about it. Support music programs in your communities. Vote for funding for arts education. Give instruments to schools that can't afford them. That's how we honor what happened here tonight." The applause that followed was different from the others. It wasn't excitement or celebration. It was respect. Recognition that this young woman thrust into an impossible situation had somehow found a way to make it mean something larger than herself. Dr. Henderson put a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "Ready to go?" Naomi nodded. "Yes, please." As they walked off the stage together, the audience applauded one more time. But Naomi didn't turn back. She'd said everything she needed to say, done everything she needed to do. Now she just wanted to go somewhere quiet, and try to process what her life had just become. The car ride from the Beverly Grand Hotel felt surreal. Dr. Henderson had arranged for her driver to take them, and now Naomi sat in the back of a luxury sedan, still in her crew uniform, while the dean of one of the country's most prestigious music schools made phone calls on her behalf. Yes, I understand it's late, but this is important. No, not tomorrow, tonight. Because I just witnessed one of the most extraordinary talents I've encountered in my entire career, and I'm not letting bureaucracy delay this by even a day. Naomi stared out the window at the Los Angeles streets. The city looked the same as it always had, but somehow everything felt different. She kept expecting to wake up to realize this had all been a dream. Her phone had been buzzing constantly. She'd turned off the ringer, but she could feel it vibrating in her pocket every few seconds. Messages, calls, notifications. Her social media accounts, which she barely used, were exploding. She had thousands of new followers, hundreds of messages from strangers. Some of them were beautiful. People sharing their own stories of struggling to pursue their passions. Parents thanking her for inspiring their kids. Musicians offering support and encouragement. Some of them were ugly. Accusations that it was all staged. Claims that she must have had secret training. Racist comments that she didn't want to read but couldn't look away from. And some of them were offers. Record labels, concert promoters, management companies. Everyone wanted a piece of her now. "Don't respond to any of that yet," Dr. Henderson said, noticing Naomi scrolling through her phone. "Get yourself representation first. A good manager, a good lawyer. People are going to try to take advantage of this moment, and you need protection. I don't know any managers or lawyers. I do. I'll introduce you to people you can trust. People who work with artists, not against them." The car pulled up in front of a modest apartment building in South Los Angeles. Naomi's building. It looked shabby compared to the luxury they'd just left behind. "This is me," Naomi said. Dr. Henderson looked at the building, then at Naomi. "I'll pick you up tomorrow at 9. We'll go to campus, start the paperwork, get you set up with practice space. And we'll talk about next steps, what you want from your career, how the university can help, what kind of support you need." "I still have to work," Naomi said. "I have rent to pay, bills. The scholarship includes a living stipend. And given what happened tonight, I suspect you'll have other income streams soon. But we can discuss all that tomorrow." Naomi got out of the car, then turned back. "Dr. Henderson. Why are you doing this? I mean, really? You don't know me." The older woman smiled. "Because 30 years ago, I was you. Not exactly, my circumstances were different. But I was a young black woman trying to make it in classical music, and someone took a chance on me when they didn't have to. Now it's my turn to be that person for someone else." She paused. "Also, you're phenomenally talented. That helps?" They both laughed, and some of the tension in Naomi's chest eased. "Thank you," Naomi said. "For everything." "Thank you," Dr. Henderson replied. "You gave me the most exciting evening I've had in years. Now go get some rest. Tomorrow's going to be intense." The car drove away, and Naomi climbed the stairs to her second-floor apartment. She could hear voices inside her mother and her younger brother, who lived with her to save on expenses. She opened the door, and they both turned to look at her. "Baby." Her mother's face was a mixture of confusion and wonder. "What happened? Your face is all over the internet. People are saying I don't even know what they're saying. Something about you playing piano at some fancy event?" Her brother held up his phone. "Sis, you're trending. Like worldwide trending. There are videos of you everywhere." Naomi stood in the doorway of their small apartment. The apartment she could barely afford, the apartment where she'd spent the last 6 years trying to figure out how to survive, and suddenly everything hit her at once. The fear of the performance, the triumph of the music, the scholarship offers, the attention, the weight of suddenly representing something bigger than herself, the memory of her father, who should have been here to see this, but wasn't. She started crying. Deep, gasping sobs that came from somewhere primal. Her mother rushed over, pulling her into a hug. "It's okay, baby. It's okay. Whatever happened, we'll figure it out." Mama Naomi managed between sobs. "I played tonight. I played for hundreds of people. And they stood up. They all stood up. And someone offered me a scholarship to USC. And Daddy's piece, I played Daddy's piece and everyone heard it, and her mother held her tighter. Your daddy knows. Baby, wherever he is, he knows. And he's so proud of you. We're all so proud of you." They stood there in the doorway, holding each other, while Naomi's phone continued to buzz with messages from a world that suddenly knew her name. While Naomi was collapsing into her mother's arms in South Los Angeles across the city, Julian Cross was experiencing his own reckoning. He'd left the gala immediately after Naomi's final speech. No headline performance, no schmoozing with donors, no photo ops. He'd walked out the back entrance, got into his car, and driven home in silence. His phone was exploding too, but with very different messages. His publicist, "We need to talk. ASAP. This is bad." His manager, "Emergency meeting first thing tomorrow. We need damage control." His label, "Call me immediately." And then there were the public messages. His social media accounts were being flooded with comments. Most of them were not supportive. Imagine being so insecure you try to humiliate someone on stage. Julian Cross's true colors showing. Never supporting him again. That woman played circles around you and you tried to mock her. Disgusting. This is what privilege looks like. Some of his fans were defending him. He apologized. "What more do you want? Everyone makes mistakes. Cancel culture is out of control." But they were drowned out by the criticism. Julian sat in his penthouse apartment, the apartment that cost more per month than most people made in a year, and watched his career implode on his phone screen. Music industry publications were already running stories. Julian Cross's failed attempt to humiliate unknown pianist backfires. Spectacularly, viral moment shows pop stars' cruelty, unknown artists' grace. TMZ had picked it up. Entertainment Tonight. Even mainstream news outlets were covering it because it touched on issues of race class and access to education. His agent called. Julian answered. "Julian, what the fuck were you thinking?" "I don't know. I wasn't. You just humiliated yourself on camera in front of millions of people. Do you understand what this means? Brands are already pulling out. Your endorsement deal with Steinway. Gone. They released a statement an hour ago saying they don't want to be associated with someone who uses music as a weapon." Julian closed his eyes. Fuck. The tour is in jeopardy. Venues are getting calls from protesters. Some are threatening to cancel. This isn't just bad press, Julian. This is career-ending if we don't fix it fast. I apologized. "I'm donating money. What else do you want me to do? I want you to mean it. I want you to actually understand what you did wrong, because right now it looks like you're just trying to save your ass." His agent paused. "Look, I've been your agent for 8 years. I've watched you change. You used to actually care about music. Now you care about being famous. And tonight everyone saw that. They saw the real you. The question is, can you become someone better? Or is this who you actually are?" The call ended. Julian sat in silence, looking at his gold records on the wall, his awards on the shelf, all the markers of success he'd accumulated. And he realized he couldn't remember the last time he'd played music just because he wanted to, just because it made him happy. Everything had become about metrics, streams, sales, chart positions, social media engagement. When had it stopped being about the music? He thought about Naomi playing tonight. The joy on her face when she was lost in the performance. The way she'd played like the audience didn't even exist, like she was communing with something beyond herself. When was the last time he'd felt like that? He couldn't remember. His phone buzzed again. Another message. But this one was different. It was from another musician, someone Julian respected, an older artist who'd managed to maintain integrity throughout a long career. The message read, "I saw what happened tonight. What you tried to do was wrong. But what you did afterward, the apology, the donation, that's something. The question now is whether you're going to treat this as a PR crisis to manage or as a wake-up call to actually change. Choose the latter. You'll be a better artist and a better person for it." Julian read it 3 times. Maybe he thought this could be the moment he figured out who he wanted to be. Not the celebrity he'd become, but the musician he'd started out wanting to be. It would take work. It would take humility. It would mean stepping back from the spotlight he'd craved so desperately. But maybe that's exactly what he needed. 3 weeks later, Naomi walked through the gates of USC's Thornton School of Music for her first official day as a student. The last 3 weeks had been a whirlwind. Dr. Henderson had been true to her word. She'd introduced Naomi to a management team that specialized in classical musicians, and they'd helped navigate the sudden flood of attention. They'd fielded offers from record labels, negotiated a deal with a concert promoter for a series of recitals, and helped Naomi set up the legal and financial structures she needed. The video of her performance had been viewed over 50 million times. Major news outlets had interviewed her. Late-night talk shows wanted her as a guest. But through it all, Dr. Henderson and her new team had protected her. "You're not a circus act," they'd told her. "You're an artist. We're going to treat you like one." So Naomi had said no to most of the publicity requests. She'd agreed to one interview with NPR's All Things Considered, where she'd talked thoughtfully about music education and access. She'd done a profile with the New York Times that focused on her artistic process. But mostly she'd tried to focus on what came next, her actual development as a musician. The scholarship money from both the Children's Music Education Foundation and Julian Cross's contribution had been set up in a trust. Between that, her new stipend from USC, and the advance from her recording contract, which her managers had negotiated carefully to protect her rights, Naomi suddenly had financial security for the first time in her life. She'd been able to move her mother and brother to a better apartment, pay off her mother's debts, buy an actual piano, a beautiful upright that now sat in her new apartment's living room. But the best part? She got to play. Every day. In world-class practice rooms. With access to multiple pianos. With the freedom to explore and experiment and grow. As she walked through campus that first morning, students recognized her. Some smiled and nodded. Some stopped to introduce themselves. A few asked for selfies, which felt strange but also kind of wonderful. Dr. Henderson met her outside the main music building. "Ready for your first day?" "I think so." Also terrified. "Good. Comfortable students don't grow. Come on, I'll show you to your practice space." They walked through halls lined with soundproof practice rooms, each one occupied by a student working on their craft. The sounds of various instruments leaked through the doors. Violins, cellos, flutes, trumpets, and multiple pianos, all playing different pieces, creating a beautiful cacophony. Dr. Henderson stopped at a door with Naomi's name already on it. "This is yours. Whenever you want it, day or night." Naomi opened the door. Inside was a Steinway grand piano, not as large as the Model D she'd played at the gala, but still a professional-grade instrument. The room had excellent acoustics, adjustable lighting, and a comfortable chair for when she needed to rest. It was perfect. "There's a faculty recital tonight," Dr. Henderson said. "Some of our best performers. I'd like you to attend if you're interested. Start getting to know the community here. I'd love that." Dr. Henderson smiled. "Good. Oh, and one more thing." She handed Naomi an envelope. "This came for you yesterday." Naomi opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. "Dear Naomi, I know I'm probably the last person you want to hear from, but I wanted you to know that I've been doing a lot of thinking since that night 3 weeks ago. I've taken a break from performing, canceled my tour, told my label I need time to figure out who I am and what I actually want from music. I've been volunteering at a music program in Watts, teaching kids basic piano. I'm not very good at it yet teaching. I mean, I'm used to performing, not instructing. But I'm learning. One of the kids asked me yesterday if I'd ever heard you play. I told him I had. He said you were his hero, that seeing someone who looked like him and came from a neighborhood like his do what you did made him believe he could do it too. I realized I've never been anyone's hero. I've been their entertainment, their celebrity crush, their fantasy, but never their hero. You gave that to him, and to thousands of other kids. That's worth more than anything I've ever done with my music. I'm not writing this for forgiveness. You don't owe me that. I'm writing because I want you to know that what you did that night changed more than just your life. It changed mine too. Thank you for that. Julian. Naomi read the letter twice, then carefully folded it and put it back in the envelope. He's actually doing it, she said to Dr. Henderson. He's actually trying to change. People sometimes surprise you, Dr. Henderson said. Not always, but sometimes. Naomi looked around her practice room, and felt a wave of gratitude so intense it almost knocked her over. I need to play, she said. Dr. Henderson smiled. Then play. I'll see you tonight at the recital. She left, closing the door behind her. Naomi sat at the piano, placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes, and she played. Not for an audience, not to prove anything, not because someone expected her to. She played because this was who she was. This was what she was meant to do. The music poured out of her, all the joy, all the grief, all the fear and hope and wonder of the last 3 weeks. She played until her arms ached, until her heart felt full, until the sun coming through the window shifted from morning light to afternoon glow. She played because she could, because she'd earned this, because her father had believed in her when no one else did. She played because music was her language, her truth, her gift to the world. And in that practice room at USC, with no one listening, but herself, Naomi Brooks played better than she ever had before. 6 months after that night at the Beverly Grand Hotel, Naomi gave her first official recital at USC's Bovard Auditorium. Every seat was filled. People stood in the back. The waiting list for tickets had been hundreds deep. But it wasn't just her viral fame that brought them. It was what she'd been doing in the months since. She'd given free concerts at community centers in South Los Angeles. She'd partnered with the Children's Music Education Foundation to create a mentorship program for young pianists. She'd started a YouTube channel where she taught technique and music theory, making the education she'd cobbled together from disparate sources available in a more organized way to others. And she'd practiced, hour after hour, day after day, refining her craft under the guidance of world-class instructors. The recital that night was extraordinary, technically brilliant, and emotionally devastating in equal measure. She played her father's piece. She played her own compositions. She played the Rachmaninoff that Julian had mockingly suggested she couldn't handle. She could. And at the end, she stood to address the audience. When I was 16 years old, my father died because we couldn't afford the medical care he needed. Before he died, he made me promise that I wouldn't let anyone make me feel small, that I'd keep playing no matter what. Her voice was steady now, confident in a way it hadn't been 6 months ago. I kept that promise, but I was only able to keep it because of incredible luck, because I happened to find a community center with a piano, because someone uploaded the right videos to YouTube, because I was given an opportunity at exactly the right moment. She paused. But luck shouldn't be the determining factor in whether talented young people get to pursue their passions. Access shouldn't be a luxury. Music education, all arts education, should be a fundamental right. The audience applauded. There are thousands of young people out there right now with gifts they'll never get to develop because they don't have the resources. Not because they lack talent, not because they lack dedication, but because they lack access. She looked out at the crowd, a mix of USC students and faculty music industry professionals, donors, journalists, and regular people who'd been moved by her story. So I'm asking all of you to do something. Find a music program in your community that needs support and support it. Donate instruments, volunteer time, vote for funding. Do whatever you can to make sure that the next kid who falls in love with music can pursue that love without depending on viral moments or extraordinary luck. More applause. Because here's what I've learned in the last 6 months: talent is everywhere. Opportunity is not. And our job, all of us, is to change that. The standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the recital, Naomi stood in the lobby greeting well-wishers. Her mother was there crying with pride. Dr. Henderson was there beaming. Her management team was there already fielding offers for future performances. And standing near the back, trying to be inconspicuous, was Julian Cross. He'd come alone. No entourage. No cameras. Just him. When the crowd thinned, he approached Naomi carefully. "I hope it's okay that I came." "It's okay," Naomi said. And she meant it. "You were extraordinary tonight, even better than at the gala." "Thank you. I heard you're still doing the teaching program." "Yeah, 5 days a week now. I'm not sure I'm going back to performing. At least not the way I was doing it before." Naomi studied his face. He looked different than he had that night 6 months ago. More tired, maybe, but also more at peace. "Music doesn't have to look one way," she said. "There are lots of ways to have a meaningful life in music. Teaching is one of them." He smiled genuinely this time. "Your kids at the program, they ask about you all the time. They've seen all your videos. Maybe I'll come visit sometime. If that would be okay. They'd love that. I'd love that." They stood there for a moment, two people whose lives had been changed by one extraordinary night, now finding their way forward in very different but perhaps equally meaningful directions. "I should let you go," Julian said. "You have a lot of people waiting to talk to you." "Julian." Naomi stopped him. "What you're doing, the teaching, the volunteering, actually showing up and doing the work that matters more than the apology, more than the money. So, thank you for actually changing." He nodded, visibly moved, then disappeared into the crowd. Naomi turned back to her life, to her mother, her mentors, her future, all the possibilities that had opened up that night on stage. She thought about her father, about the promise she'd made him, about how she'd kept it, and how she'd keep on keeping it. Because this was just the beginning. The viral moment had opened doors, yes, but what she did with those opportunities, that was up to her. And she was going to make it count. Not just for herself, but for every kid who loved music but didn't think they had a chance, for every dreamer who'd been told to be realistic, for every person who'd ever been underestimated because of where they came from or what they looked like. She was going to show them what was possible. One performance at a time. One composition at a time. One student at a time. This was her purpose, her calling, her gift, and her responsibility. And she was ready.